4 bone-chilling diner horror stories that actually happened. Welcome to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps. In today's video, we delve into the unsettling and chilling world of diner horror stories that are as true as they are terrifying. Imagine sitting down for a simple meal, only to realize that the place you thought was safe holds dark secrets, and something sinister is lurking in the shadows. From eerie encounters with strange patrons to unexplained occurrences in the dead of night, these stories will make you rethink your next late-night diner visit. So prepare yourself, because these horrifying tales are about to send a chill down your spine. Let's get started. Story 1. Diner Horror Stories, The Terrifying Customer. I never thought I'd have a story to tell like this. Most nights I was just another waitress at a small diner in Washington, doing my shift late into the night, serving the occasional trucker or lonely night owl looking for a warm meal before heading back home. But one night, everything changed. It was supposed to be a routine evening shift, but it turned into something I can never forget. It was a quiet night, the kind where the neon signs outside flickered softly in the rain, and the diner was nearly empty. As usual, I was closing up, wiping down tables, and finishing my final rounds before locking the doors. That's when he walked in. He wasn't a regular. In fact, I had never seen him before. A tall man, probably in his mid-30s, with dark, slicked-back hair and a pale, almost sickly complexion. His eyes were the most unnerving thing about him. They were cold, sharp, too sharp. They seemed to look straight through me as if he were sizing me up, trying to read something deeper than I was willing to show. "Is it too late for a meal?" His voice was smooth, almost too polite, but it carried a strange undertone, like he was rehearsing the words. "No," I replied, forcing a smile. "We're still open for a little while longer." I handed him a menu and watched him settle into a booth in the far corner. At first I thought nothing of it, just another customer, just another late-night order. But there was something off about him, something I couldn't place. He ordered a burger and a cup of coffee, the usual late-night fare. But he didn't stop there. He started talking to me, asking questions that felt far too personal for someone I had just met. "Do you work here often? Is it lonely working the night shift?" And then more disturbing questions. "Do you live alone? And do you have anyone waiting for you at home?" I laughed it off, thinking maybe he was just trying to be friendly, but something in his tone made my skin crawl. I answered his questions with as little detail as possible, keeping my responses short, but he wasn't letting up. Every time I tried to walk away, he would pull me back into another strange, oddly intimate conversation. And the worst part? He seemed to know things about me that I hadn't shared with anyone. As I turned to walk back to the counter, I caught a glimpse of him watching me, his gaze fixed, unwavering, with a strange smile playing at the corners of his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I felt my heart race, my hands trembling slightly as I returned to my duties. Eventually he finished his meal, left a tip, and left the diner. I thought I was safe. But when I stepped outside to head to my car, I froze. There, parked next to my vehicle, was a strange, unmarked car. My stomach sank. I didn't recognize the car. It wasn't one of the regulars who usually parked near the diner, and it was parked far too close to my own. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just someone else with bad parking habits, or another customer who had parked too close. But that feeling of unease only grew stronger as I approached my car. I started the engine and began to drive, trying to shake off the nagging sensation crawling up my spine. But then it happened. I heard a loud pop, and the car swerved. One of my tires had blown out. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding. The street was empty, eerily quiet. There was no one in sight. It was late, and most people had already gone to bed. I stepped out of the car and checked the damage. One of my tires had been completely shredded. It was clear now. Someone had done this intentionally. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. That's when I saw him. Nolan. He was walking toward me from the darkness, emerging from the trees like some kind of ghost. His presence was overwhelming, and the hairs on my arms stood up as I watched him approach. His eyes, those eyes, were locked on me with a chilling intensity. "Need some help with that tire?" His voice was calm, almost soothing, but I could hear the underlying menace. He was standing too close now, too close for comfort. I took a step back, my heart racing. "I'll be fine," I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay composed. But he didn't move. He just stood there watching me, his eyes gleaming in the dim light of the street lamps. "You sure about that?" he asked, his lips curling into a slow, predatory smile. There was no warmth in it, only a cold, unsettling malice. "You wouldn't want to be out here all alone, especially at this hour." I couldn't look away from him, couldn't understand what was happening. My pulse hammered in my ears as I took out my phone, my hand trembling. I had to call someone. I had to get away from him. Without taking my eyes off him, I quietly dialed 911. My finger hovered over the call button, but before I could press it, Nolan stepped forward, his hand reaching out like a predator about to strike. "Don't," he said softly. "You don't need to make this harder than it has to be." I slammed my finger down on the call button and held the phone up to my ear, praying the dispatcher would answer quickly. As the phone rang, Nolan's expression shifted. Something dark and dangerous flickered in his eyes. That was when he did the unthinkable. With one swift motion, Nolan swung his arm and smashed the window of my car. Glass shattered everywhere, raining down around us. I screamed, the sound lost in the vast emptiness of the night. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I felt paralyzed by fear. But just as quickly as he had attacked, Nolan turned and bolted into the darkness, vanishing into the trees. The sound of his footsteps faded, but my heart kept pounding. My thoughts scrambled. I was still gripping the phone, breathless, when the dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency?" I need help. Someone's trying to hurt me. He was trying to break into my car." I could barely speak, my words coming out in gasps. "Stay on the line, ma'am. We've already dispatched officers to your location. Help is on the way." I don't know how long I stood there staring into the dark road where Nolan had disappeared. I heard the distant sound of sirens, and finally the police arrived. But by then, there was no sign of Nolan. No car, no traces. Just the wrecked window of my car, the shredded tire, and the overwhelming sense that something was very wrong. The officers searched the area, but there was no sign of him. No trace of anything that could lead them to him. They couldn't find him. They couldn't even find the car he had been driving. I remember driving home that night, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about Nolan, about the strange, unsettling way he had looked at me, the things he had said, the way he had appeared out of nowhere. It felt like something straight out of a nightmare. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random incident. Something told me Nolan wasn't just a man. He was something darker, something that had been lurking in the shadows for far longer than I could ever understand. I never went back to that diner again. I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. Every time I drove at night, I kept expecting to see his face in my rearview mirror. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, I'd look over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there. And then, one day, I stumbled across something online, a story, a creepypasta, about a man who would stalk people, befriending them, getting close to them, and then following them until they were too terrified to live their lives normally. It described a man named Nolan. And in that story, he didn't stop at just one victim. He went after them all. I knew then. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was something far worse than I could ever imagine. And Nolan was still out there, waiting, watching, and I was his next target. Day after day, I tried to forget what had happened, but I never could. One night, as I was about to fall asleep, my phone rang. This time, there was only one message. I know where you are. I looked out the window, saw a figure standing at the end of the road, hidden by the dim streetlights. My heart sank as I recognized the person. It was Nolan. I quickly turned back to look at the phone screen, but there was only an empty message. And then there was a knock on the door. Each knock was like a beat in my heart. It was not a joke. He had found me, and this time I could not escape. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 2. The Watcher at the Amusement Park. This story is one that I will never be able to forget. The terror I felt still haunts me to this day, and I'm sure it will stay with me for the rest of my life. If you're someone who enjoys a thrill, be warned. This is not just a tale, but a warning. A warning about the things we encounter in our day-to-day lives that we can never truly explain. And sometimes those things can follow us home. I was 15 when it all began, working at a small amusement park in northern New York. It was a summer job, nothing glamorous, but it was fun. I worked in the parking lot, directing people where to park and helping visitors find their way around. It was a busy day, the sun was shining, and the park was buzzing with families enjoying their day. The kind of place where you'd expect to hear the sound of roller coasters in the distance, the laughter of children, and the jingle of ice cream trucks. But there's one thing I'll never forget from that summer. Him. He appeared out of nowhere, a man in his 40s, scruffy looking, with a patchy beard and a tattered jacket. His eyes, black, deep, and unnervingly intense, seemed to pierce right through me. I had just finished directing a family to their car when he approached. He didn't ask for directions the way most visitors did. He simply stood there for a moment looking at me before asking in a slow, deliberate voice, "How do I get out of here?" I wasn't exactly sure why, but something about his presence felt off. Maybe it was the way he spoke, or the way his eyes never seemed to blink. I pointed him down the main road, trying to brush off the uncomfortable feeling he gave me. He nodded, and without another word, he turned and walked off. That was the last time I'd ever see him. Or so I thought. A few hours later, after my shift was over, I was driving home. The sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow over the quiet streets. I took my usual route, a long, empty stretch of road that was far away from the lights and crowds of the city. That's when I noticed it. A car in my rearview mirror, following me. It was a black sedan, and at first I didn't think much of it. But as I kept driving, the car stayed with me. No matter how many turns I took, the car stayed a few yards behind, never speeding up, never slowing down. A chill crept over me. The street was empty, and the car's headlights were the only thing cutting through the growing darkness. I tried to shake the feeling, but it grew stronger. As I turned into my neighborhood, I glanced back again. The car was still there, following me down my street. Panic set in. It was then that I realized it wasn't just any car. It was his car, the man from the park. His eyes were unmistakable. Even from a distance, I could see him sitting in the driver's seat, his gaze locked on me through the rearview mirror, as if he were waiting for something. I didn't know what to do. My heart raced in my chest as I pulled into my driveway, quickly getting out of the car and rushing inside. I locked all the doors and peeked through the curtains, my breath shallow, trying to steady myself. I expected to see his car drive away, but instead I saw something worse. He had parked across the street. I could see him standing there, just beyond the street lamp, his face partially obscured by shadows. There was no sound, no movement, but the way he was standing, still unmoving, watching, made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. My gut told me something was horribly wrong. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "There's someone outside my house," I said, nearly whispering. "I think he's following me. I don't know what to do." The dispatcher reassured me help was on the way, but by the time the police arrived, the man had vanished. No trace of him, no car. It was as if he had melted into the shadows. The officers searched the area, but they found nothing. They told me it was probably just some harmless coincidence, maybe someone lost or just passing through, but they left me feeling more unsettled than I had ever been. The next day, I didn't go back to work. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his eyes staring at me, following me. It was as if I couldn't escape him, and in a way, I couldn't. Even after I stopped going to work, I kept feeling like I was being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I would turn my head, half expecting to see him there, lurking in the shadows. It was as though he was always a few steps behind me, no matter where I went. The paranoia grew. The sense of being followed became overwhelming, consuming me. It was a constant pressure, like something sinister was just waiting to happen. I never saw him again after that night. The park, the car, the man, they all vanished into thin air. I tried to forget about it, tried to move on. But the truth is, there are some things you can't forget. There are some people, or maybe things, that stick with you no matter how far you run. I'll never understand what happened that summer, who that man was, or what he wanted. Was he just a creepy stranger, or was something darker at work? The feeling of being watched never fully left me. It was a sense of paranoia, an instinct that I couldn't shake. Even now, I often find myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if maybe, just maybe, he's still out there, waiting. So let me leave you with this question. What if the man you pass on the street today, or the stranger who asks for directions, is more than just a random person? What if he's not a man at all? What if he's something else? And what if, like me, you're already being watched? Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 3, Horrifying True Diner. Horror story, The Man and the Woman at the Diner. I'll never forget that night. It started like any other late shift at the diner, with the rain tapping against the windows and the low hum of the neon lights. But by the end of it, my perception of safety was shattered forever. What I thought was just another regular evening at the diner quickly spiraled into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. Let me take you through the details, but be warned, you may look at late-night diners in a very different way after hearing this. It was a stormy night, the kind where the wind howls and the streets are deserted, save for the occasional car rushing by. The diner where I worked was tucked away on a quiet corner of town, a place that mostly attracted people who were either passing through or the occasional regular who couldn't sleep. On that night, there were only 2 customers, a middle-aged man and a younger woman who appeared to be in her early 20s. They had been sitting in silence for a while when the man started talking to me. At first it seemed harmless, just small talk, but as the conversation unfolded, I began to feel an unease settling in. "Do you live alone?" the man asked, his voice low, almost too casual. I froze for a moment. There was something about his tone, something off. It wasn't just a question. It felt more like an interrogation, like he wanted to know too much. But I forced a smile and answered, trying to keep the conversation light. "Yes, I live alone," I replied quickly, avoiding his gaze. He didn't let up. "Are you sure? No one else with you?" His eyes were fixed on me now, and I could feel his gaze piercing through me, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Just me," I said, trying to sound as confident as possible while I mentally calculated the quickest way to end the conversation. But there was something unsettling in his smile, something that didn't sit right. The woman next to him seemed to avoid eye contact, as if she was trying to shrink into the corner of the booth. It was a strange dynamic, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were both hiding something. I excused myself to check on a couple of other tables, hoping that would break the tension. But when I returned to their booth, the man had ordered more food, or so it seemed. The woman hadn't touched her meal, her hands trembling slightly as she stared out the window into the storm. I did my best to keep my distance as I served their food, but the man's eyes never left me. He asked another question, this time about my personal life. It was almost as if he was trying to pry into my world, probing for things I didn't want to share. And then, just like that, they were gone. The man left a tip, too generous, and they exited into the storm without a word. As the door swung closed behind them, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. There was something about that encounter that lingered in the air, an uneasiness that I couldn't quite place. I didn't think much of it until I got home later that night. The rain had only gotten heavier, and as I made my way up the stairs to my apartment, I saw a figure standing near my door. A woman. She looked young, and there was an expression of pure terror on her face. My heart skipped a beat. Please help me," she pleaded, her voice shaky, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm running from him. He's coming for me." At that moment, a chill ran down my spine. The storm outside howled, but the silence in the hallway was deafening. Something was terribly wrong. I opened my mouth to say something, but I couldn't form words. She was standing there, desperately trying to catch her breath, and I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. And then I saw him, the man. He was standing just behind her in the hallway, his eyes fixed on me, his smile slowly spreading across his face. My blood ran cold. It was him, the same man from the diner. He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving me. I felt my body freeze as fear gripped me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if he was a threat, or if this was some kind of sick joke. My instincts screamed at me to shut the door and lock it, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. The woman behind me looked as if she was about to faint, her hands shaking uncontrollably. In that split second, I slammed the door shut and locked it. My heart was pounding in my chest. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do. I didn't know if I should call the police or if I was overreacting, but I had no time to think. My hand trembled as I dialed the emergency number. When the police arrived, the man and the woman were both gone. The hallway outside my apartment was eerily quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. I thought I had imagined the whole thing. But when the officers checked my door, they found something. A message written on the wood in what looked like red ink. "Run, before it's too late." I froze. My stomach turned. This wasn't a simple case of a runaway woman or some random person stalking me. This was something far more sinister. The police were as confused as I was. They couldn't find any trace of the man or the woman, and the message on the door only added to the mystery. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was at play here. That this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. After that night, I couldn't sleep properly. Every little sound outside my apartment would make my heart race. Every knock on the door sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept thinking about the woman, the man, the strange conversation in the diner. What if they were still out there watching me? What if this was just the beginning? And then there was the message. Run, before it's too late. The words echoed in my head every time I closed my eyes. But who was it for? Me, the woman, or was it a warning for something far worse? I don't know what it all means, but I do know one thing. If you're ever sitting alone in a diner late at night and a stranger starts asking you questions, especially questions about your personal life, trust your instincts, because you may just find yourself caught in a nightmare you can't escape from. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 4. The Man in the Cafe, a horrifying true story. I'm a first-year student living in the suburbs where life is usually quiet and the neighbors keep to themselves. One chilly fall evening, after a long and exhausting study session, I decided to stop by the 24-hour cafe I often visit to relax. It's a quiet spot with just a few patrons scattered around. The soft yellow lighting gives the place a cozy, warm feeling, and it seemed like the perfect place to wind down. I found a table near the window, sat down, and let the familiar comfort of the cafe wrap around me. The noise of the outside world seemed so far away. At first, it was peaceful. I sipped on my coffee, letting the warmth spread through me as I gazed out the window at the falling leaves. The quiet hum of the place, with its low conversations and the faint sound of a jazz playlist, was just what I needed. I thought of nothing in particular, just the usual worries of college life. But then something happened that changed the course of my night. A man entered the cafe. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, wearing a long black coat. His presence felt off, even from the moment he walked in. He didn't look at anyone in particular, but somehow his aura was magnetic. He had a peculiar air about him, as if he wasn't quite fitting into the world around him. I couldn't help but notice his eyes. They were unnaturally dark, so black in fact that they seemed to absorb the light. When they briefly met mine as he passed by, I felt a coldness seep into my bones. His stare was unwavering, like he was looking straight through me, as though he could see things I couldn't even understand. The man didn't sit too far from me, just a few steps away at a table across the room. But as he settled into his seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't simply a person. There was something else about him. He wasn't just sitting, he was studying the room, his gaze lingering on me in a way that felt invasive, like I was the only other person in the cafe. I tried to ignore him, focusing back on my coffee, but every time I looked up, I saw him watching me. His eyes seemed to follow me, not in a way that suggested curiosity, but with a chilling intensity, like a predator studying its prey. I felt my skin crawl, and a deep sense of unease began to take root in my stomach. It was as if the space between us had grown thicker, heavier, and the soft murmur of the cafe began to feel distant, as if the world outside that table no longer existed. Minutes passed, or perhaps it was hours. Time seemed to lose meaning. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild, but something was wrong. I could feel it. Then, without any warning, the man stood up and slowly made his. When he reached my table, he asked in a low, deliberate voice, "Do you know how to change a tire?" His words were oddly calm, almost too calm for the situation. Taken off guard, I stammered, "No, I don't." But then his question took a turn that made my heart skip a beat. "Are you living alone?" he asked, his voice never wavering, almost mechanical. "Yes," I replied, a little too quickly. "I live alone, in the building just around the corner." A strange smile crept onto his face, one that didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile that was more unsettling than comforting. There was something deeply wrong about it, like it was a mask he wore. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that I was overreacting, but I couldn't escape the growing sense of dread gnawing at me. The man said nothing else. He just stood there, staring at me, as if waiting for something. I quickly stood up, gathered my things, and left the cafe. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, but something didn't feel right. There, parked directly in front of the cafe, was my car. My stomach sank as I noticed one of the tires was flat. I couldn't explain it. It was like a nightmare unfolding in real time. I looked around, my heart racing, wondering if I should call someone for help. But before I could even think clearly, I heard a faint sound behind me, like the squeak of a door opening. I whipped around to find that the cafe door had creaked open again, but when I looked, it was completely empty. The man was gone. In his place was only a faint, lingering smell of something burnt. I turned back to my car, and for the first time I felt a twinge of panic. I knelt down to inspect the tire, my mind racing, but then something caught my eye. Just beyond my car, standing under the dim light of a nearby street lamp, was the same man. He hadn't walked away, but was simply standing there, unmoving, watching me. His face was now completely expressionless. The smile had disappeared, replaced by a blank, almost frozen look. It was like he was waiting for me to react, to acknowledge him. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I had to leave, fast. I quickly got back into my car and locked the doors, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. But as I started the engine, I noticed something even more chilling. The rearview mirror reflected something that wasn't there before. There, in the reflection, was the man, standing behind me, so close I could almost feel his breath on my neck. His face was now pressed up against the glass, his eyes wide open, and I could see that they were no longer just dark. They were pitch black, like endless voids. I slammed the car into drive and sped away, not daring to look back. When I finally made it home, I was shaken to my core. I tried to shake off the fear, telling myself that I had just let my imagination run wild, but something kept nagging at me. That man, his strange questions, and that smile, they didn't add up. I didn't know who he was, but I felt certain of one thing. I'd seen him before. In the corner of my mind, I remembered something I had read once, somewhere, about a man who haunted certain places, always asking people questions, always appearing at night, and then disappearing without a trace. People said he was a ghost, a warning. Others said he was something darker, but no one could explain it. I tried to push the thoughts from my mind, but they kept circling back, like a dark, insistent whisper. I couldn't forget the feeling that I was being watched, and I couldn't shake the thought that the encounter wasn't just an isolated incident. It was as if something had been set in motion that night, something I couldn't stop. And as I lay in bed, the only sound I could hear was the steady thump of my heart and the faint creaking of a door opening somewhere in the distance. As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here. It only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, now and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the creeps are always waiting, and they never rest. Good luck sleeping tonight.